To the left, we have the Samsung S90F from 2025, and to the right, we have the 2024 S95D. Now, the relevancy of this comparison is to really answer the claims of the S90F being brighter. Is it a glossier S95D? So on and so forth. The list literally goes on. I will save you a lot of the guesswork, and I will say the S95D does end up winning this comparison. However, it could turn depending on what you look for. Me personally, I love a lot of rich contrast. The S95D does have that. Now, this is important to note because the S95D does have a matte finish screen, and there has been so much stupidity around this. I have not addressed it yet. People literally telling you to peel off the finish of your S95D just to get the contrast back so that maybe it can compete with something like an S90F. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This comparison is going to show you clearly that, okay? So buckle up, let's dive on in by talking about what we're seeing in this image. Clearly, the image to the right has a ton more in the way of contrast, just darker outlines and the difference between light to dark. You're able to see that a lot better. And again, the S90F being more pale by comparison. This year, the theme really seems to be lifted shadows. And a lack of contrast. Only way I could really say that, easiest way I could tell you that, there's just anywhere there's supposed to be three-dimensional shadow rendering at all, it doesn't happen. And what I mean by that is shadow rendering is things like this, the things that on algorithmic processing isolate and really pull out that extra detail to really give that really intense shadow, which creates contrast, which creates that depth and immersion that pulls you in. That does not have that. It's just very two-dimensional. It doesn't give you three-dimensionality. And that feeling will be felt across a multitude of content pieces, from gaming to movies to TV shows. It really doesn't matter what you have up on the screen. That's going to be the general feel. Now, some people might feel as though that's not fair, or, it's an S95D. Of course, the flagship model is going to be better. The excuse mill will never cease to amaze me. However, we're not really here for that. What we're here for is just to show you a like for like, left to right, what you're looking at. Contrast and three-dimensionality are the thing this year with Samsung's QD OLED, at least at the S90F level, don't know about the D yet, that you are indeed missing. And it is such a shame because you're clearly seeing something with a matte finish that has been the talk of a lot of controversy. Like, oh, this is just a contrast killer. It's no good. It can't compete. Well, here you're seeing that's just so not the case, because the contrast is every bit as good and better as what we're getting on the Samsung S90F to the left. Don't get me wrong. Both images look good. The S95D just has that extra headroom for brightness, and that gives it a lot in the way of looking better in a lot of these examples, especially for, again, SDR, which is what this comparison is based off of. We will be doing an HDR comparison as well, so stay tuned for that. And we're going to keep going. Okay, so again, the differences that you're going to notice in things like brightness may or may not show up on YouTube, and it may make the S90F in some instances look, I guess, clipped or washed out. On the real world, on my end, the S90F in this particular example does exhibit slightly better color. There's just more luminosity in the red and the flag. In some instances, you can see a little bit in the way of slightly better highlights in the background, but that's where it stops, because after that, the entire image, from the purity of the vibrancy and the overall contrast, will go to the S95D. Now, in this example, the highlight on the dress right here is stronger on the S90F. So this is showing you that, yes, it is able to pump out and use a lot of its brightness. You also have very open shadow detail in the background. Again, things like foliage, like here, is going to be a lot more visible. And this is where they put a lot of their processing, brighter highlight here. So that's what they're doing. The S95D is not worried about that. Instead, it's focusing on giving you that three-dimensional draw. So if you really pay close attention, then we can notice things like the foliage separation. Follow the shape of my finger, and you can see just how it wraps around and creates that like foliage that really comes out and draws you in, where that does not do that. The same holds true when we talk about rocks. Instead, the rocks are being rendered as three-dimensional objects instead of more two-dimensional objects. So while yes, you're not getting the same level of global brightness or full screen brightness, you most certainly are getting just a treat in terms of that three-dimensional quality. Now, again, that's not to say that the S90F is a bad TV, because it's not a bad TV. I don't want you to hear any of this and think, oh, it's just a bad TV. I mean, look at it. It's going toe-to-toe with an S95D, which was last year's flagship, and I'd say it's holding its damn own. That in and of itself tells you it's a great TV. However, when we're talking about which one is better, because ultimately we need to pick a winner, well, obviously, that's where we start having different conversations. Now, again, the impact of this scene to the left is felt more on the S95D. This, or rather the S95F to the left, because it's giving you the extra color luminosity in the roof, albeit that isn't technically the accurate way of doing things, where the S95D kind of reeling it in a little bit, just giving you a little bit more of realism. So again, it's brightness versus realism, and that's going to be a preferential thing in some cases. Not everything is going to be a slam dunk. Some things are going to be scene to scene. Take this scene, for example. Now the S95D to the right, pumping out a way clearly stronger highlight than what we have on the F. So again, I can see way more vibrancy, way more color, way more contrast, way more intensity in this example. And that's something that can be felt, where I don't really know that the S90D or S90F rather to the left is able to really keep up. And again, just so everybody can see that this is the S90F, because people are weird, I'm just going to show you that's the new menu system for 2025. So it's not like I've swapped them out and it's now the S90D doing this comparison. This is the F, okay? I don't really have an answer for why they look so different. Again, I like the look of the S90F in this example. I think it's doing a wonderful job of giving me all of the kind of color that I would want. The S95D is just a little bit too bright here in this example. Now, again, you can argue, oh, well, what picture mode are you using? The S95D to the right is fully optimized. So this is my standard preset. This is my eco preset. The movie mode preset, filmmaker mode preset. Yes, you can make it dimmer, but I don't watch TV that way, so I use the standard preset. This is how I'm doing it. It's optimized. There is no room for argument kind of thing. It really is just what it is. And again, the S90F is doing a better job comparatively to the S95D in terms of giving me that better contrast here in this example. So again, don't hear this and think like every example of contrast is just a slam dunk for the S95D. Literally, though, in the next example, you can clearly see it's a slam dunk for the S95D. Now we have better color volume, luminosity. Everything just makes way more sense here and looks way better with a ton more detail. Don't know if YouTube's going to show that than what we're getting over here, where, again, it's just a step behind. Again, it's not a bad TV. It's not knocking the TV. It's just saying that there are some key differences. Now, in this particular example, I'd say they're pretty identical. I will give the color advantage to the S95D, along with just a hair of the three-dimensionality as well. It's just drawing me in a bit more, and again, I mean just by a bit. And again, that is a testament to the improvements that they've made this year on the S90F. Again, it's a lot closer to an S95D, just with a glossy screen for those who don't believe that matte finish is the way to go. Which again, I hear you, matte finish is not for everybody. I personally don't like the matte finish, but there is no denying that contrast-wise, we've got to put that conversation to bed, okay? At this point, you kind of sound a little foolish saying that the S95D or S95F just simply can't compete with a glossy screen on any level, because here you're seeing it. It is competing. And yes, in this particular example, it doesn't have all the contrast. But again, as you clearly see, when you switch to other examples, it switches and you get more contrast. Now, again, the brightness here is stronger on the S95D, and overall, the S95D is presenting the stronger bright brightness. So again, if you like brightness, the S95D is just going to be your guy. The S90F, just slightly behind that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. That tends to preserve, I think, contrast and color in some scenes like this one just a little bit better, as we can see each line on the frog just a little bit clearer, versus something like this where not so much. Now, if you guys remember my comparison of the S90D versus the S95D, the S90D actually ended up beating the S95D. So there's no surprise here that the S90F is similarly doing a good job of holding its own against the S95D. But it doesn't beat it, because I've noticed a lot of examples where there's just contrast loss and flatness happening, where again, things that should be more three-dimensional stop being three-dimensional. Now again, because of the brightness advantage of the S95D to the right, you are just not going to be seeing what I'm talking about in terms of, hey, this thing is just super bright with a lot of contrast. I can only imagine if I were to go into my settings here and I were to lower down the brightness, perhaps then you would probably see what I'm talking about. So what I'll do is I'll lower down the brightness to just like, I don't know, 45, not even a whole lot, maybe 40. I think 45 should be enough, okay? Just so you can see, like, just toning the brightness down a little bit, you can kind of see more of what I'm talking about now, where there's just such a clear three-dimensional draw to it. Because again, cameras are not going to pick up the brightest screen as being the most contrasty or the most like three-dimensional or popping. So again, just to show this in real time too, because not a lot of YouTubers will tell you this, again, you really have to trust the reviewer that's giving you the information, because when you go into brightness, and let's say you start turning down brightness a ton, right? I want to make this TV look better on camera. The camera is sensitive to light. That's why it's called ISO, right? It's the camera sensitivity to light. The lower you make this number, the better you can make your TV end up looking ultimately, right? Like now, it looks amazing on camera now. And if I were to do something like play around with my ISO like right now, and I raise it just a little bit more around about there, I could be like, look how amazing the S95D looks over the S90F. Well, no shit, Sherlock. You've dimmed it down so that the camera can pick it up better. That's cheating, and that's not how it's done. And that's why I say I only really want to do it to like 45, because that's about as much as I'm willing to give as far as image quality, and, you know, still be in the realm of realism. I think people would lower it down to 45. I've most certainly done that before. So that's why we also have to cover this aspect of it. It is very, very hard to show everything I'm talking about here on a YouTube video, so just keep that in mind. Now, that being said, that's not to say that, again, in every example is going to be a slam dunk for the S95D. It's not. Again, there are areas that the S90F does do better, but overall, as I look, contrast, clarity, everything about this image to the right on the S95D is just better. I mean, you could clearly see the stark, clear contrast. It's sharper, it's darker. That's way too over brightened, and it's not really giving you the contrast where you should have it. Now, again, for argument's sake, one could say, well, that's because you dimmed it down and you just explained how that whole thing works. Well, we'll go back in and we'll brighten it back up to the full 50, and you won't see a change in that contrast at all. As you clearly see, again, maxed out, it still looks every bit as dark and rich. So again, not to mistake raising the luminosity for a way to accommodate for the contrast loss entirely. It just won't happen all the time that way. And again, in examples like this, yes, the S90F to the left has a lot better color yellow. That's clear as day. That is a massive improvement over to the right, where it's just a little bit behind. I don't know if one is more accurate or the other. I prefer the look of the really yellow one to the left. I mean, again, and that's the thing, these images do tend to go back and forth a whole hell of a lot. But in terms of like natural contrast and natural contrast rendering, all day I've got to give it to the right. The best way I could describe this to you is like the image to the left looks a lot more like a Samsung. The greens start to look a lot more neon and things like that. And the image to the right looks closer to like a Sony, right? Where you just have that natural separation. You see all the detail in the leaves and everything, all the contrast, where that is too much. You're not really getting that. And I think, again, it's not that it's wrong per se. It's just not doing it justice, I suppose, like what you would want it to be doing. And again, there is really ultimately no bad TV here. I mean, they both look nearly identical in this example. Clearly, obviously, if you pay attention, you'll see that the clarity and the contrast is just better on the 95D. But the F is hanging in there. And that now poses a different conversation. If the Samsung S90F is basically S95D level, do you really need to buy an S95D for the extra money? And that comes down to the conversation of how much contrast are you willing to give up, how much highlight detail, purity, clarity, because the S95D is, by every stretch of the imagination, a flagship model. It just is. And you will see that and feel that in the highlights. Like now, like in the water, for example, you can feel that extra highlight there where that is just dim now. This is the difference between flagship and junior flagship models. There's always just that hair of a difference, that secret sauce or that slight step up that you just don't get on the other model. And again, everybody is going to have their different opinion about that. For me, I would rather pay the difference and get the better TV. That's me personally. However, would I say then that it is so much better that if you didn't have the money that you need to just go on a crazy savings spree and get yourself the S95D? No, absolutely not. I can't say with all confidence that the S95D is just so much better that it just justifies, not having a TV because the S90F is just so inadequate. That's not true at all. Because it is a beautiful TV, as you clearly see, delivering jaw-dropping contrast and beautiful color. But you have to understand when I'm giving these types of reviews, we're talking comparatively to what they've done at their best level from last year and how that has changed this year. And again, there are going to be some things that are just better, right? Like the way that they render faces this year, I actually really like. So they've really toned it down a bit and really focused on details when there's a face introduced, where here they're just focusing on the red luminosity here and the red luminosity in the face, which over brightens a bit. And that's not really my thing. And that's where I can see the S90F kind of being better because skin tones tend to look a little bit better. But again, now looking at this is just way better. Clearer, foliage, everything. So it does trade back and forth. And again, that skin tone thing isn't 100% guaranteed across the board either. It's kind of the ultimate tit for tat where you really have to consider again, how much are you willing to lose is really, it's the ultimate conversation because here we have all of the greens and all the gradients and the grass and everything. And it looks beautiful, truly. But so does that. And it's not to take anything away from anyone. I mean, really, like whatever you walk away with, you will walk away with a good TV. However, I will again say, I would go for the S95D personally. That's my pick because while sometimes skin tones can be a little bit turned down, in other examples, they can be too turned down. Like now, like this is just too muted and the color tends to go away a lot more than here where you retain that rich color, you retain that rich contrast, and it is just a contrasty image. So if you don't like contrasty images, then the D series is just not for you because that is what they did. Look at all the rich contrast that you have. If you like more flat image quality, then the S90F is going to be your guy. In the world we live in today, though, which is how I arrived at this verdict, the world is not flat. There is no ounce of flatness. Everything is contrast in this world. And we're trying to get closer and closer to human vision. And I just don't see the level of realism on the S90F more consistently like I do on the S95D. Despite having strong examples do not tell the entire story. And you can try to pick it out of a YouTube video all you'd like. But ultimately, until you sit down and you optimize the hell out of both and you look at both side by side and see what both are offering, you're not really going to know like which one is going to be quotation mark better. And this is where I get really like fucked up with this whole comparison because it's like, I see where both have advantages over the other. I can see, color luminosity coming through here looking really beautiful, but I see depth and contrast and clarity of the buildings, of the windows, the sharp isolation. I see all of that in an instant. And it's really hard to sell that to the average consumer. So I would say the S95D is more for that pure, keen, sharp eye that loves crystal clear clarity and three-dimensional contrast with stark, rich, vibrant, just inky colors. But for somebody who just wants an OLED experience, then go for the S90F. If you're not really like, if a TV is a TV to you, but you just want a really nice ass one, get the S95 or S90F, right? Because it's a nice ass TV that'll give you close to flagship level, but not quite making it there. Again, and the things like the just tighter highlights and things like that, that's the stuff that some people care about, some people don't. I'm one of those people that really give a fuck about that. Like, if you don't have that, I'm going to go crazy and it's going to bug the absolute crap out of me. But again, everyone is different. So in essence, it really will depend. Scene for scene, like for like, match for match, whatever you're looking at, they will trade back and forth. Sometimes the S90F has some really amazing contrast that surpasses the S95D. Sometimes the S95D just blows it absolutely away. Sometimes they look identical. But there's a consistency, and the consistency is simply put, the S95D just has that extra headroom for brightness that really impacts the color luminosity, vibrancy, draws your eye to it in a way that the S90F just can't do consistently. That does not mean the S90F is a bad TV though, it just doesn't have that pop, that wow, like genuinely wow factor that the S95D by comparison will be able to pull off. Again, anyone walking away with either of these TVs, congratulations, you've got a great TV. I will say leave it offline, and I will say that again, it depends on your preference. I love the vibrancy here to the right on the S95F, or rather S95D. It's just blowing me away. The level of red, vibrancy, the punchiness, the highlights, all of it feels good. And the skin tonality, all of it, it truly does feel good. The S90F just a hair behind, and that's really what it boils down to. Either way you go, again, as I've said throughout this video, both are a good TV, but the winner of this comparison is going to be the Samsung S95D. Thanks so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. In the next video, we do HDR. So if that interests you, make sure you smack a like, hit that bell notification to stay notified, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.